Meeting up with more IRR. February 27th, 7 p.m. Personal diary. Well, we are in the BSA battalion unit. We have been assigned to Company A, 2nd AD POL. They are located about 80 kilometers up north near Kuwaiti City. They are so far ahead of schedule they don't know what to do. Why are we here? I wondered this over and over. I have seen so many enemy POWs. I am told they were eating 2 spoonfuls of rice every other day. Wow, and we continue to throw away parts of our MREs. These people don't want to fight. They just want to go home, a home without Hussein. Their life is tough, but even so, there's a dog here that many abuse, but then again, many care for. The skies continue to be black, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's almost pitch black. Death is in the air. This could be the end of the world. Am I prepared? But I fear for so many. To think currently I am on the other side of the world. To think I had never heard of Kuwait until this all began. 1 million people fighting over oil and sand. Seems like a joke, doesn't it? After a few more hours, we pulled next to a small position with white cargo trucks. There, we met some more IRR soldiers. Some were like us, and a few others were sent here right from basic. What was interesting is that many of them were women. They had some stories to tell about the first few hours. Then we all stopped talking as we saw them, truck after truck filled with Iraq POWs. They were all standing up in long trucks driving down the road headed to camps. From the way it sounded, most of the Iraqi soldiers had surrendered willingly, having almost starved to death sitting in foxholes. The shock and awe campaign had knocked out most of the supply, food and petroleum, leaving these soldiers all alone for weeks. They had surrendered to be fed. A few of the soldiers told us about how they had been on guard duty and having a group of 4 Iraqis surrender to them. The soldiers had just walked up to the guard position and just begged for food. Many of them were just young kids. That night we slept on the bus because there were no cots for us or anything for us but a cold MRE. Outside of Kuwait City. The next day, on February 28th, we arrived at our new unit and became a part of the 1st Cavalry. We were lined up, and the first sergeant explained that we had arrived pretty much after the war was over. As the IRR, we didn't have many responsibilities, but there were many details to do around the new post, and we would be doing that. We were now located at what looked like an old way station for trucks about 7 miles outside of Kuwait City. There was a paved circle around the way station where all of the 20 fuel trucks for the unit were parked. A few of them pulled up to the front to provide fuel operations for military vehicles on the move. I was partnered with one of the fuel truck drivers, another specialist, and was told that he would help me. I was given a cot to sleep on, and that was basically it. I know that it was hard for their unit to suddenly have 20 more soldiers to deal with, but it became obvious pretty quick that there was a hierarchy in this unit, and the IRR soldiers were at the very bottom. It was with this in mind that I began the next few months of my duties in a foreign country. Historic note. On Wednesday, February 28th, Kuwaiti troops raised their flag once more in Kuwait City, and President Bush announced an end of combat and ceasefire operations. The ceasefire allowed Saddam to stay in power and be monitored by the UN. March 1st, 8 p.m. Dear family, hi. Well, as you know, the war is over, thank God. As it turns out, I made it in time for the ground war. As it started, I was still in Saudi Arabia. We drove by bus into Kuwait to marry up with the platoon. We then became part of Tiger Brigade Alpha Company POL platoon. Their purpose was to drive up to where the tanks were coming back off the line, fuel them up, and return back to base. As you probably heard, there wasn't much resistance, so this went fairly quickly for them. Mostly the unit met soldiers surrendering and begging for food and water. I didn't see much, but I took a few pictures coming in. The weather was awful until today due to the smoke from the burning oil wells. Being sent over here and worrying so many, I was hoping I would see some action so that I could come back as a war hero. Well, I can't say I saw much action. There was stuff we could hear in the distance, and there was always a chance more Scud missiles would strike, but I must be honest, it felt a little weird being this place without a real mission anymore. There was so much buildup and fear. There was this idea that we would be in a fight and I would give my life as sacrifice for my country, that I wouldn't return. but in the end, I didn't see much of anything. And then, as if a slap in the face, they let Saddam stay in power. I was standing in Kuwait with the sun blotted out by the smoke each day from more than 600 oil wells he lit up. It took people more than 6 months to put them all out. He had let his troops starve to death in foxholes, demanding they stay and fight. He had cost me time from my life and many deaths on both sides, and in return, President Bush and the coalition let him stay and keep his job. What the hell? How does this happen? We had a chance then to end the war and put Saddam out of power for good, but it was not to be. I never voted for another Bush again. Welcome to the pit. The permanent soldiers in our unit had cots in the big headquarters tent. I only got to go in there once or twice when I was on a detail for the sergeant. It wasn't a bad life, and the soldiers had a place to put their duffel bags and a place to sleep out of the weather with wood floors. However, when we arrived, the unit didn't have a place to put us, and they certainly didn't seem willing to accommodate us in their tents. So we either set up our cots outside under the stars, or we could sleep in the vehicles. I think the guy I partnered with felt a little embarrassed at the decision. He tried his best to offer me solace and a place to put my stuff in his truck, but it was clear we were outsiders and we always would be. So the 8 IRR soldiers I was with did what any group would do with time on their hands. We built a huge pit. We had our tent halves, and so we created a narrow pit deep enough that you could stand up in, but only as wide as the tent. It turned into a pit that was about 12 feet long by 3 feet wide by 5 feet deep. It was our home away from home. It was too small to sleep in, but it was great for getting out of the dust and wind. The bad part was that we were sitting ducks when it came to duty. All the sergeant had to do was come to the entrance to the tent and yell, "IRRs, I need 3 volunteers." We all became very close during those weeks in the pit. We played so many games of spades that the cards were worn out, and some were bent so much that you could tell who had the big joker or who had the ace of spades. We were scavengers because we came in with nothing, so we would find empty boxes that we could use to make seats and tables. We had a collection of MREs to snack on when we were hungry, many of them picked over, leaving only the chicken a la king entrees, which the starving dogs roaming the desert wouldn't even eat. Formations and our new liaison. While most of the IRR were either specialists or privates, there was one sergeant who came along with us for the ride. His name was Sergeant Wilson. Wilson reminded me of what Steve Urkel from the TV show Family Matters would look like all grown up. He was shorter than me with big round glasses and a friendly yet goofy demure. They had given Wilson a place in the big tent. He would come to us throughout the day and give us our duty assignments. We would let him know our gripes, and he would take it back to the first sergeant. He was a nice guy in a tough position. When he was coming, it reminded me of the drill sergeants in basic training. You needed to hide or you would be volunteered. Also, he looked clean and well kept. Did they have a shower and running water that we didn't have use of? I will never know. Black snot. In the first few weeks in Kuwait, you could see the burning oil wells in the distance. There also seemed to be very little wind, so the smoke would just hang over the camp. It would be noon, and I could look up at the sun, which was just a small dot of light through the darkness. We were breathing this shit, and the soot was everywhere. I would blow my nose into a tissue, and it would come out black. I would cough up phlegm, and it was black. I had no idea what, if any, permanent damage there was to my body, but it certainly didn't feel good. It also made life depressing. I now know what it must be like to work in a place like Alaska where they go days without sunlight. We knew the sun was there, but couldn't see it through the smoke. The flies. Probably the worst part about living in the desert was the flies. I never did see many other creatures. I have seen pictures of these huge desert spiders, but I never saw anything like that. No mosquitoes either, luckily. But there was no shortage of black flies. Some of them would bite, but mostly they would just land on your arms or face and not leave. You would shoo them away and they would come right back. At first, it would drive me crazy, but after a while, like everyone else, I just got used to having them on my body, not even bothering to shoo them away. This sounds disgusting, but it is just the way we lived. The shovel. Along with our unit, There were many other units at this station. All of them were in various states of civilization. The IRR were definitely the most primitive. No electricity, no running water, and no latrines. Sometimes at night you could hear a radio or you could see lights from some of the other units' tents. They were definitely units who had power and were more equipped, but they didn't share. Some of them even had running showers. When it came to bathroom facilities, we were just told to pee anywhere. We were in the desert and there was no coverage anywhere, so we peed between the tires of the trucks. However, taking a shit was a much different story. When you had to go, you took your folding entrenching tool, your shovel, out beyond the units into the dunes. Now, at first, this was a little scary because Saddam had put landmines in a lot of areas, and you just didn't know if there were any out in the dunes. But after a few soldiers had safely returned, we all felt safe. I waited until it was darker and then made the trek out into the dunes. It was weird being away from everyone. You basically just dug a hole and squatted or sat down to do your business. I have to say, it was nice to get away from everyone. Even though I liked my fellow IRR soldiers, we were all a little bit on edge, pissed off that we had been taken away from our civilian life, pissed off that we were treated like dirt by the regular soldiers, and pissed off at the rumors that were constantly flying around about when we might leave. I learned to enjoy those moments once a day on the walk out and back. March 7th, 3 p.m., personal diary. Well, the war has been over for who knows how long. We have not heard any news in over a week. The worst is that the people at home continue to worry, thinking I'm not safe. Maybe the main reason for all this was to make them strong, for them to feel a little of worry and pain. I just wish I could get some information to my family. I met a girl here who needed someone to talk to. Yes, I suppose it was my duty to help her back on course. Her best friend had died shortly after she came in the military, suicide. As always, I did what the Lord always wanted me to do. I was a close friend and supported her through pain. I fear she did not hear most of what I was saying. I guess she is not far enough along to understand, but someday she will remember and her mind will take charge of the information I have given her. I have realized since being here with no mission that my priorities and calling have changed slightly. I must move out of Boulder. I must find a new location to start over. Not that I should break all of my links, but I must free myself. The days drag by here. As always, I have no communication either way, and it worries me. Luckily, by Sunday, I may be able to free my friends and family from worry. I hope it is so. As always, my dreams linger at home with no news that we have a date to leave. It gets harder to achieve that goal. Hopefully, my dreams are falling into place as I write this. I don't know. Other people are making decisions for me at home, and I hope they are the right ones. It had been almost 2 weeks since I'd been able to get a letter out to anyone. They really had no idea what was happening with me at home, and I knew this must have been so hard on my family, especially my mom. I was in a helpless position, but they did mention the option of a phone call home, but no one knew when or if this would happen. Before leaving for Kuwait, I had put Amy in charge of my finances with the goal to find a new place to live out of Boulder. I just knew that this trip to the desert would change me and I needed a fresh start. The problem was I had no way to contact her either, so decisions were being made without my say. Real Chow. A couple of weeks into our little adventure in Kuwait, some new vehicles arrived. We heard through the grapevine that it was real food, and it turns out this time the rumors were correct. We were now going to get a hot breakfast and dinner every day. Oh my gosh, no more MREs. It was amazing how fast we moved that first day after evening formation to get in line. With what seemed like 1,000 or more soldiers in this location, getting through the line took forever. You didn't have the kind of time needed to get to know the cooks, but I was able to sweet talk one chef into giving me a little extra scoop of the potatoes that first day. God, it felt good to sit with a paper plate and hot food with a fork, not out of a bag. They also had drinks for us. They were warm, but a warm Orangina soda was a hell of a lot better than the warm canteen water we had been drinking. The flies were all over our food and us. However, for the first time in a long time, we were happy and full. Ninja for drinks. The boredom was getting to my fellow IRS soldiers, some more than others. One group decided that we needed more drinks. They had seen pallets of Orangina soda just waiting to be had, so one night after dusk they did it. They snuck out and went to the pallet. I heard that it was an interesting adventure where they almost got caught, but they returned with drinks for everyone. They hid the case of Orangina in a spot in the sand wall in our pit. Over time, we had made many little niches in the walls to hold stuff like games and MRE snacks. Pulling guard duty. Right after we got to camp, the guard duty rotation started. They were 2-man, 2-hour shifts that ran 24 hours a day. With very few IRR available, we seemed to be pulling the duty at least once or twice a day. The duty involved having our M16 with us, but no bullets. If we needed bullets, we were to call the main guard post on the radio. Occasionally, vehicles from other units or even other countries would show up, as we were a main refueling station along the highway to Kuwait City. If we were able, we would ask for any news. Generally, they only knew what they had heard on AFN radio, just like us. What was wild was the foreign soldiers driving by, or Kuwaitis driving by, as they would be standing in their vehicles screaming and yelling at us, giving us thanks. These were the moments I cherished from this experience. It was the moments when I knew that what we had done was worthwhile. While I wasn't in the main attack, how many really were? I was there giving my time and support to the cause, the liberation of Kuwait, and that felt good. Guard duty is boring most of the time, and since I spent every waking minute with the IRR soldiers in the pit, there just wasn't much to talk about. One time, this soldier from another unit came out to hang with us, and we noticed that he was slurring his words pretty bad. Alcohol was a big no-no here in the Muslim nation, but somehow a group had smuggled in a bottle and he was drunk. It was a good laugh as we chatted and he told stories. God, I could really have used a drink that right about then. Pulling fuel duty. The other duty we pulled less often was fuel duty. We sat at the fuel station, which was 2 Hemet vehicles backed up to the road, and we would fuel vehicles as they came by. I guess in Kuwait, gas was plentiful because we didn't have to ask any questions. It didn't matter if they were Australian or British or American troops, we fueled them up. It was nice to talk to soldiers from other countries and hear about life and their stories of how they got here. Everyone was ready to go home, but we were all waiting. Letters to and from home. Yeah, right. Dear family, I guess I feel I did my part and am more than ready to come home. I have heard IRR are going first. This brigade has a tentative date of March 15th for returning. I know I am not going all the way with them, but I will have to go back to Fort Knox, then on to Fort Lee, and hopefully home. I wish there was a way to get a hold of you sooner, but there seems to have been no communication. Tomorrow I will try. We are right on the highway close to Kuwait City, and more people are moving in here, so maybe they will have a fax or some communication. I feel bad because I know you are all worried and there's nothing I can do. We were working on a guard point, worthless now, out in front of the highway, and trucks of troops, I think. Egyptians were driving by and waving. We waved back. It was very patriotic. But after you see these pictures, you will wonder why 1 million people on combined sides were fighting over this barren wasteland. I will never know. By the way, I do expect a big party for my return. And do not be afraid to buy some hard alcohol because for a day or two I will need it. All I can say is it could have been a lot worse if those troops hadn't surrendered because they had some serious weapons unused. Basically, I need news. So save the papers from the beginning of the ground war, please, because all I know is there was a ceasefire. I don't even know if they are going to keep that bastard, oops, excuse my language, Saddam in power. I miss all of you, even Pepper and Toby, the other family cats. Unfortunately, I probably won't even see any email before I leave, but I do appreciate all you did. Love always, Mike. P.S. Haven't had much time, so please say hi to Michelle, Pat, and all the other relatives. I hate that I had no way to contact home and tell my family that I was safe. I wanted just 5 minutes on the phone to relieve everyone. They had no idea where I was. Since coming to the Middle East, it was nearly impossible to find a place to mail a letter either. Plus, I know now that many of my letters never even made it home. Even so, I continued to write them and hoped that they were receiving them. As soon as the war was over, the rumors began. We had no idea when we were going home or if we would release us from active duty. Some had said they could hold us for up to a year, which is what my original orders had said. Mail call, or grab what you can. After about a month in Kuwait, we started to get some mail. However, it just trickled in, and it was rare that I would go to mail call and get anything. The regular soldiers seemed to be getting a lot more mail, I think, because it was being forwarded directly from Fort Hood to them. Anyway, sometimes we would get these gift boxes for the whole unit. Usually they were pretty picked over by the time the IRR got a shot at it, but occasionally I would get another book or two to read. With all that time on our hands, it was great when you got a new book instead of rereading the same one, or when you were really tired of playing spades. The IRR rumors. Hi, family. I hope you're all doing well. I hate to say this, but I think all the mail that didn't have the new address you got for me on March 10th will never get to me. I know you all sent me mail, and it was greatly appreciated in spirit. Hopefully, with the new address, I should get mail sometime this week. Morale is very low with us IRR due to the fact that they keep changing the dates on us. It went from the 10th to the 13th to the 31st, back to the 18th, which was what we thought until today when it changed again. I guess I just want to get home in time to see Michelle graduate. I don't know. I feel like we are wasting away out here, dragged out of school and my life to sit here for a month and do nothing. If you have time, call our congressman and see if maybe they can do something about us. Well, not much else to say. I guess I will be spending my 23rd birthday out here. Someday, I guess. Love always, Mike. It was rough being the go-to group for all the details for the unit. We were all desperately tired of sitting on guard duty or filling vehicles. We just wanted to go home. Around March 10th, we heard a rumor that spread like wildfire through the ranks. It was rumored that on March 15th, a bus would be coming through to pick up all the IRR soldiers and take them to process out. We would be fast-tracked since it was costing the government way too much money having all of us on active duty. Congress was pushing for it, and it would happen. I had heard many rumors before, but this was the first one with so many details, and it seemed so legitimate. Well, the 15th came and went, no bus. I realized after that moment that we were probably just stuck with this unit until they went back to Fort Hood. I heard the military were approaching it as in first in, first out, which was pretty good for us all since First Cav had been here for a long time before the war even started. Getting away from it all. There really wasn't any way to get away from everyone. Going out to the bathroom was a nice moment away, but there were always soldiers everywhere. Sometimes I would escape into the fuel truck to get away. I had my Walkman to listen to music, and it could also pick up AFN at times. There were two songs that kept me going in those dark patches, and if you walked by the truck, you probably could find me singing along. These songs seemed to be requested and played a lot on the radio. One was Home Sweet Home by Motley Crue. The second song was released in late 1990 and became a theme song for many soldiers. It is called Show Me the Way by Styx. Show me the way. These songs became very popular, and for me, they sometimes led to a lump in my throat as I looked out from the dirty truck window at the dusty, sandy plains and the burning oil wells in the distance and wondered if I would ever see home. Finally, a call home, March 16th. Dear family, well, now we have no idea when we will go home. Since we are all attached to the 1st Cav, which first moved into position in Iraq, we have to wait to meet them at the port. But at the port, we will be segregated into only IRR to be sent to Fort Knox and released. You people are never home. We've had phone use once since coming here, and you were at church. Do not take it personal, but I also had to call Amy and find out if my paychecks were going through. She should relay a message to you that I'm okay. About 3 times during the 2 months I was in the desert, we got the opportunity to call home, and it was more than 3 weeks in the Middle East before I got to make my first phone call. We loaded on the back of a big truck, and they drove us a few miles down the road. The trip was bumpy as hell, and at times I wasn't sure if it was worth it. There was nothing new to see or do, just more and more sand and military vehicles. When we arrived at the phone station, it was bright. They had lots of floodlights in the area, and there were some nice white tents and 2 huge satellite dishes. I would be allowed to make 1 full call and not for more than 10 minutes. That was the deal on the first trip there. Finally, I could call home and tell them I was safe. I waited in line for what seemed like years, and then I called and got no answer at home. Damn. What was I supposed to do? I needed them to answer, to accept the call. I tried again, still no answer. I had no other choice. I had to call Amy and have her relay the information. I talked to her for as long as they would let me. She was working on finding us a place to buy in Greeley. Yes, that was the right thing to do. I needed to get out of Boulder and find a new town to live in. So I relayed to Amy what I needed her to tell my parents and hung up with 10 seconds to spare before they would start yelling at us. As it turns out, my family was not happy with me because the message did not get relayed too well, which I heard about when I called again. Nothing in life is perfect, and I just tried my best through a bad situation. I know that everyone was so worried about me. I mean, they were getting very little news as well. Hopefully, time has forgiven those wounds, and my family realizes that I was just doing the best I could to navigate a crazy world. The Mobile Scud Missile Launcher. In one of the down times between our guard duty shifts, Wilson asked me if I wanted to go on a walk. I tried my best to maintain good relations with everyone, even though I knew that he was enjoying the benefits of a big tent. He said that it was restricted, but he wanted to check it out, so I went. There wasn't much else to do. As it turns out, it was a graveyard of some of the enemy vehicles we had captured during the battle. There was an old Russian tank, but more importantly, there was a mobile Scud launcher. By the time I had heard by this time I had heard rumors about a Scud hitting some barracks, but I had no idea how many had died or who, but I wanted a picture on top of the Scud launcher. The moment is forever embodied in the picture. It was sort of like I knew, but I didn't know, what happened to James Tatum. The Scud launchers killed more American soldiers than any of Saddam's other troops did. A shower and a laundry room. Well, sort of. When I went to the field at Fort Ord, I was usually able to hold out with enough clothes and quick cleans with water to make it through the time. However, Kuwait was a different story. It had been more than 3 weeks since I'd seen a real shower or a way to wash clothes effectively. When the real shower arrived, they also brought a huge truck of water. We could now fill 5-gallon jugs easily and start cleaning our clothes. Luckily, it was a rare day when the sun was out for a few hours and the wind was blowing the other way, so no smoke. I got all of my clothes washed and then laid them out on the hood of the truck to dry. Then a most amazing thing happened. One of the regular soldiers loaned us a portable shower head. We tied up our ponchos to provide some cover and then strapped the shower head to the top of the shower. When it was my turn, I got in. The water was cold, but it felt amazing. I felt almost human again, standing there in my slippers, naked on a road in Kuwait, surrounded by ponchos for cover. To this day, I have never forgotten what it's like to be without a shower for so long. I don't take long showers, but I do take 2 showers almost every day now. It was the one thing I really missed when I was sitting there in the desert. Rules change. March 22nd, 2 p.m., personal diary. Today is my sister's birthday. Yes, I guess life continues on while I just sit here. I sure hope death isn't like this. Boredom and waiting are like a slow death. I sit here with nothing on my mind, nothing at all. This could be hell. Now I can't even lie down to read a book. It is against orders. Amazing. The mound I'm on has grass growing on it, the Lord's sign that there is hope. I had everything, but it was all an illusion. It was snatched from me as everything in life is taken. I am vulnerable now. Is that your point? It is like a prison, and the door is closing, maybe forever. This time the wall is closing in on me, not by choice. I was through the wall, the doors were open. I would survive, but now someone is closing them for me and locking it with a key, not mine. And there I sit alone, nothing to do, no one to help. Every day in the desert, it got more and more difficult to hang on to who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. The thing about regular service was there was always a deadline in place, a date when I knew I was out. But here in the desert, there was no definite date for an end. Also, there were the weekends where you could get away and dress like a civilian to pretend. There was no moment in the desert where I could say, we leave tomorrow. It was an endless waiting game. I had been in the Middle East for more than a month. I didn't have any real friends with me. I could send mail, but very little was getting through, and I wanted to wish my sister a happy birthday, but had no way to do that. During that same time, it felt like the leaders were messing with us for their own pleasure. When we were not on guard duty or pulling some other crazy detail, we had no assignments. I liked to read what books I could find and would sometimes lay on my cot to do this. Well, at our daily formations for the unit, they would give out new rules each day. The one this week was no laying down to read a book during the day. This was against orders now. So there we were with nothing to do, trying to gain knowledge and keep our minds active, but it was not to be. PT, finally a moment of freedom. Late in March, they finally allowed us a little time for PT 3 days a week. For some reason, since we had been here in Kuwait, we hadn't had any PT. Maybe they didn't want us to get too sweaty since there were no real showers, or maybe no one wanted to lead it. I don't know, but I missed it. So as the skies started to clear a few hours a day, we were given PT time. It wasn't mandatory, but I jumped on it. It wasn't really a formal PT. We were allowed to get in our gray sweats and running shoes. Yes, I brought them with me, and go around the track. The track was just the paved area that circled the way station. It wasn't very long, maybe a quarter of a mile. When you ran around it, you could see all the units in one place. You could see the guard duty area, then the first cav units, then the other units, the chow area and the captured vehicles, the way station building, and back to the guard duty post. I didn't see a lot of regular soldiers out there, but IRR were out in force. Some just walked, and others like me would run a little. Man, I was out of shape and still coughing up the black shit, but it really took away the craziness that was going on in my head for a little bit. A dream. Journal entry. They journeyed from the void. Suddenly, they were in a vast expanse of land. What is it? The young man asked, scared by the sight. A sea of sand, he said, with no emotion in his voice. March 1991. Was I losing my mind? Maybe. Dear family, I can't help but hope everything is going well back home. We continue to sit here doing absolutely nothing. It is all a big waiting game. The thing that is so stupid is IRR is supposed to be called back only in urgent times of war. Fine. But we are done and we should be allowed to return to our civilian lives. Yes, active duty soldiers have been here a while, but they are active and would be wearing this uniform anyway, while IRR should be allowed to get back to our colleges and our other jobs. This unit seems to not care about us, either because we got here last. We pull all the details and we are more gophers and slaves than anything else. Yes, active duty soldiers have suffered, but while on active duty, it is assumed you will suffer. While no IRR has been called back since 1965, we are suffering needlessly and wasting the Army and taxpayers' money by sitting here. I know this is demanding of me to ask, but my life is being wasted here and I want to go home. The only way is for people in the United States to go through Congress and tell the military in charge of the IRR. Maybe if you have time, you can call our representatives and find out what the deal is. Now they are telling us we will fly out with these guys at the end of April to Fort Hood and may be not able to process out for another 30 days while we pull their details. This is wrong. I came to fight, not to clean up trash. I lost a semester and probably my summer for nothing. The main thing is I wanted to see Michelle graduate, but the only way that will happen is if there is noise heard from back home and they remember us. By my orders, we must go to Fort Knox to outprocess, so I can't figure out why we are going to Hood. The people that will know are at Fort Knox, where all my records are currently stored. If you have time and you want to see your son sane again, please call Fort Knox and ask them to talk to someone in charge of the IRA personnel and ask when we are getting out. Here are my orders and a phone number. I do appreciate the mail. I have received some and it is running about 10 days behind postmark date. I wish it was my letter about Michelle, but obviously it hasn't come yet. By the way, it was nothing personal, but when I'm given a certain amount of time to call and you are not home, what am I to do? Wait until the next one, which may be never? I just do what I can. It was nice talking to you on the phone. I have heard that you have been a little bit stressed about me and I'm sorry. Nothing to worry about, but if I'm here doing nothing for much longer, I will go crazy right along with my IRR buddies. If you put that love and care into calling and trying to bring us home, it would be greatly appreciated. I miss you all, or at least what I can remember. I feel I've aged 2 years in just 2 months. Love always, Mike. So, as I was reading through this letter, this was one of the last ones that made it home to my family. I really was starting to lose it out there in the desert. There was nothing to see or do. My parents weren't happy that I was calling other people with the few times I got to go to the phone bank, but they weren't home when I called. Let's just be honest, it was a rough time for all of us. Always remember that even when a war is over, it is not really over. We are going home? Well, sort of. By April, I had given up even writing a diary and most letters. I had the time, but just didn't do it for some reason. I was mentally lost in the desert, and there was nothing to say in the notes. I suppose I could have told them about the spades game I won, or the book I read, but I was just like a zombie. At the evening's formation, something was different. The first sergeant for the unit arrived and had a big announcement. We were all going home. Well, not exactly. We were heading down in convoys to Adamman. This was a port city in Saudi Arabia where we would be cleaning all the vehicles and loading them on ships for the trip back to Fort Hood. We weren't really allowed to ask questions until after the formation broke and we were released. The plan, as we found out from Sergeant Wilson later, was to ride along with the regular soldiers who would be driving the fuel trucks down. Then we would help with cleanup, and when we got back to Fort Hood, we would be processed back to Fort Knox for eventual release. Well, at least it was a step in the right direction. Freedom was in the future. It was sort of like one minute we were stuck in the desert and then suddenly we were packing up. They literally told us 16 hours before we were to leave. From that moment on, there was a lot of dumping. People from many units were dumping a lot of stuff they didn't want to take back with them. In the craziness, I picked up 2 more books from the pile and a stapler that I still have to this day. It was madness. There were cheers all around, and everyone seemed to have a smile on their face. The massive cleanup begins. The entire unit wasn't leaving yet, but many of us were. We cleaned quickly, knowing it was time to finally leave this sandbox and move on. We filled the pit that had been our home for so long in about 10 minutes. I was assigned shotgun to ride with Specialist Carter. I hadn't worked much with her, but during the cleanup and readying of the vehicle, I noticed what an incredible worker she was. She never complained, and she was one of the strongest women I have ever met. She was only about 5'5", but she was built like a tank and ready to go. Upon returning from the army, there was a huge discussion about women in the war zone. But guess what? They had already been there. Here was Carter right next to me leading the way, and she had been here since the beginning. We were packed up and ready to convoy in less than an hour. Camping out in Saudi Arabia. We left the post and headed toward Saudi Arabia. It was 10 fuel vehicles and 1 MP Humvee leading the way. The drive was slow but uneventful. As we entered Saudi Arabia, I took a picture of Kuwait in the distance. The oil wells were still burning and the skies were still black from the smoke. I tried to carry on a conversation with Carter, but the Hemet is so loud we couldn't really hear each other, so finally I gave up. In the early afternoon, we had reached the halfway point where we would be stopping for the night. We lined up the vehicles along a dirt area just off the highway. Under the highway, there was a convenience store which we were allowed to visit in pairs. There was a dog here that looked lonely, so I snapped another picture. The phone in the fake 7-Eleven. A buddy from the IRR and I walked over to the convenience store. As we were looking around the store for food, I noticed a phone on the counter. No, could it be? So I asked if I could use it. It was like 2 in the morning in Colorado, but this was an opportunity to let my family know I was out of Kuwait. The guy behind the counter let me use it. However, he told me to limit it to 5 minutes. Cool, I could do that. I am sure that no one would want to talk to me much at this hour. Mom awoke from a sound sleep, and I'm sure that didn't feel too good. But when I told her I was coming home, it was a huge relief. I hadn't been able to talk to them for almost a week, and at the time I was in a horrible mood, so they probably had no clue what was happening with me. But those 5 minutes on the phone were precious, and I know that my family appreciated knowing that I was finally out of the combat zone and in Saudi Arabia. There was still a long road ahead, but I was one step closer to freedom. You are going too fast. It turns out that it was Ramadan when we were traveling. Ramadan is a Muslim month of fasting to commemorate the first revelation of the Quran to Muhammad. This meant that Muslims were supposed to fast from sunrise to sunset every day for the month. After my phone call, I struck up a conversation with the clerk. He was very nice and spoke a little English. He told us about the fasting and invited us to come back at sunset to join him and his friends in some food. That was so nice of him, and my friend and I said we would be back later. I bought some bread, turkey, and cookies to tide me over. It would be great to eat a little something different tonight other than the MREs or the chow hall. As we were walking back, we saw another convoy of big trucks exiting the highway and heading past us. They were driving really fast, and each vehicle was taking the corners quickly. I leaned over to my friend and I said I thought they were going too fast. Moments later, the truck coming down the exit took the corner faster than others, trying to catch up, and it flipped over. My God, what did I just see in front of me? This was one of the trucks that I trained with back at Fort Dix with the big rig and long trailer. It flipped on its back and had just enough momentum to flip back to right side up. My friend and I looked at each other and froze. We started running to help, and then I remembered the MP group. I yelled to my friend that I was headed there and then ran as fast as I have ever run back to camp to get them. I arrived in a matter of minutes to our camp, but couldn't speak. I couldn't catch my breath, but then finally I got out the words, "Crash, come help." They jumped in their MP Hummer, and I hopped in the back. We were there in a moment. The MPs were able to secure the area while they waited for help. It was not like there were ambulances that could be called on 911. We were in a foreign country. But finally, a military ambulance did arrive, and they helped the driver and his partner. The driver was really beat up, and they called in a helicopter to transport him to the ER. With nothing to do, my friend and I went back to find our store purchases, which we had thrown to the ground, and then headed back to camp. We heard later that the soldiers lived, thank God. It was so scary. Dinner with our new friends. Even though it had been such a crazy ordeal in the afternoon, we headed back to the convenience store that evening. The clerk and his friends welcomed us and gave us seats. We had naan, which is a flat bread, some grilled chicken and vegetables. It was not really my favorite food, but I enjoyed the time getting to know the other people who had welcomed us. At that moment, everyone seemed so happy with America and their allies. All the Muslims in my time in the Middle East were friendly and never had an unkind word to me or any of my buddies. We got back to back. We got back to back to our convoy later in the evening and noticed a campfire going. The MPs had stopped at the convenience store as well and picked up some chicken. They had designed a makeshift grill in the ground, and they were cooking the chicken on some fencing they had found lying in the field. They offered for me to join them, but I was beat. It turned out that it was well past midnight before they were able to eat the chicken, as it took so long to cook. So I'm glad I didn't stay up for it. Life in the apartments. Who did we displace? We arrived the next day at the docks, where we would clean the vehicles in the future. For now, we just parked them and loaded up in a bus to take us to the new barracks. We arrived late in the evening and were happy to get to our room. When we pulled up, I was pretty surprised. This looked like fancy condos. We entered the building, and it was a beautiful grand staircase up to the second level. We were escorted to the third floor and down a hallway to a small room. There was a bathroom outside for us to use. I would say the room was about twice the size of my room at Fort Ord. It turns out this is where the IRR troops would stay. It was a tiny room for that many of us, but we were certainly used to small conditions after the pit. The question I wondered as we entered the building is, who did we displace? Who used to live in this building and was forced out to accommodate the soldiers? Don't drink the water. Even though the water in our sink and showers seemed safe in the condos, we were told not to drink it. There was a trailer of water outside where we could fill our canteens, and there was bottled water available at meals. Even though I was not drinking the water, I was still getting sick to my stomach every day. Maybe it was the food, I didn't know. But then I realized my mistake. I was brushing my teeth every morning and night at the sink and rinsing my brush with the water. I guess it was enough to cause me problems, so I stopped. Gross. Life in Adaman. We didn't really have a place to have formation each day, so we would just meet in a rec room on the floor of the building. There was no furniture anywhere in this building, which was strange, and many rooms didn't even have electricity. We would gather in the morning before chow and then again after chow in the evening. There wasn't much to do yet until it was our turn to take our vehicles to the washing and prep down by the docks. So we would just meet and review things. We always had to be in uniform and ready to go when we were here in Saudi Arabia, which stunk. Oh, and of course there were still duty assignments. The assignments did seem to be spread a little more evenly now that we were back in a civilized place with walls. The duties generally included strange guard duty assignments. A number of times I was assigned to the corner of the complex in an abandoned building. We would take the elevator to the top of the building and get on the roof. It was probably a 20-story building. We were supposed to look over the side of the roof and monitor that there was no movement of people coming into the complex. There wasn't much logic to this for a number of reasons. One, there was a team of MPs down at the bottom monitoring all areas. Two, the stone railing around the roof was so tall you could barely see it over the ground. In fact, when I was on duty there once and with one of the shorter women in the group, she couldn't even see over it. Three, there was no bathroom for us to use. And finally, we weren't given a radio to contact anyone if there was a problem, or bullets to stop anyone attacking. So what could we do, really? We usually just talked, looked around, or took pictures. The shifts were long, also, 3 or 4 hours sometimes. They did have a cot where one of us could rest while the other person watched. We were deep in Saudi Arabia, not Iraq, so there was very little chance of any type of attack. The Muslim prayers. We realized right away that we were in a foreign land when we heard the prayers through the speakers before sunrise on that first day. On all of the buildings in the complex, there were outside speakers that blasted the Muslim prayers for the day so all could hear. There were 5 daily prayers in the Muslim religion: Far, pre-dawn; Dur, noon; Asr, afternoon; Maghrib, sunset; and Isha, evening. I didn't pronounce those right, I'm sure. We were awakened each morning at dawn to the sound of those Muslim prayers. Now, I am a pretty tolerant person to other religions, but this was one ritual I just didn't get. It was still dark outside when that first prayer started, and it was every morning without fail. I applaud the dedication of the Muslim people, but it would have been wonderful if they could have just waited until, say, 7 a.m. to start each morning. By the end, you sort of had the prayer memorized, and it permeated many of my dreams at night. The tent shop, or how many t-shirts can I buy that say Iraq on them? Now that I was back in civilization, I could finally get some more personal supplies. There was a set of large tents where the Saudis sold goods for us to purchase. We had to convert our money to the Saudi money, so that could be confusing at times. They had so many things for sale that you might imagine, and they were definitely trying to capture the tourist in all of us. There were the classic Hard Rock Baghdad or Kuwait shirts. There were real Iraqi money with Saddam's face on it. There were some candy and food, but much of it was unreadable as it was in Arabic. I tried to avoid purchasing much, but I did have to get my Hard Rock Baghdad shirt. Time to eat. The chow hall, which was a makeshift tent area with lots of picnic tables, served everyone who was on this complex, which I estimated at more than 1,000 people. Ours was just one unit headed home, and there were many soldiers here running the complex. The food was hot, which was good, but just like in the regular army, it started to get boring after a while. Lots of spaghetti, probably every other night. There was a little lunch wagon right outside the chow hall that served burgers and fries, run by a couple of locals. The burgers were just okay, but it was a great change of pace. They had certainly found ways to take our money even in a combat zone. The taxi cab drivers in Saudi Arabia. After a few days in the condo, they lightened up the rules and allowed us to go into town for some shopping. There were rules about how things went, and women were not allowed to go alone. So my friend Maria from guard duty and I headed into town. We had to remain in military uniforms, and we had to be careful where we went. The taxicab drivers were very friendly, and it was clear that they were trying to learn our language to better help us. The driver drove us to the local mall, which was one of the only places we were allowed to go. Mall of America? No. I was in Saudi Arabia standing in an outside mall of stores and restaurants, and I had to go to the bathroom. And I don't mean just number one. We had just finished shopping in the stores, and I'd picked up some great new cassette tapes to listen to. The boxes they were in were strange, and I'm pretty sure they must have been pirated copies, but I needed new music badly. We had also stopped to get a little food in the local McDonald's. Well, it wasn't really a McDonald's, but they had burgers and fries. Anyway, I was standing in the street trying to decide if I can make it back to the barracks or if I needed to find a bathroom here. Another grumble. Nope. Gotta do it now. I looked down the street to find a restroom. There was not a public one in sight. I saw a fancy restaurant that looked promising. I told Maria to please wait, and I rushed into the restaurant. The host only spoke Arabic, but I was able to give the proper signs that indicated I needed a bathroom. He pointed me to the back, and I headed through the door with the markings for males. There was a sink to one side, and then I saw it. There was no toilet, but just a hole in the ground to squat over. I was probably in the fanciest restaurant on the block, and all they had was a hole? But with another stomach cramp, I had no other choice. Why is it that I love America? Flushing toilets might be a pretty high up there on the list. We got back to the barracks pretty late that day, but not late enough to miss the meeting, or so we thought. We walked in just at the end because they had decided to move up the meeting time today without telling anyone in the morning. Stupid me, I should have waited outside for 5 more minutes, and they would have never had noticed that we missed it. Instead, we walked right in. We were questioned immediately as to why we were late. The sergeant didn't accept the excuse that we didn't know what the time was. Guess what, he announced to everyone as they were being dismissed. I just found my 2 soldiers for first roof duty tonight. Not that duty again. Back to being a car washer. After a few days in our new condos, it was finally time for a platoon's turn at the cleaning and prep. We headed out by shuttle to the docks where we began the process of cleaning the vehicles, the mud and dirt that had caked on for the 6 months they had been in the field. It was hard work, but I couldn't help but enjoy it, knowing that we were getting closer to the end. Plus, it was hot that day, so a little cold water felt good. I again reveled at how hard Carter worked. She was like a machine, and she never once complained. It was so nice for my image of a woman in the military to be changed. She was a great worker, while the other IR workers, on the other hand, were more like the slackers from basic, except for a few. And of course, there were 1 or 2 girls who had found a way to the sergeants in charge to talk their way out of work. But after 2 days of washing, we were done. Then we got our orders back to Fort Hood. We were headed back to the States, but not quite home yet. King Fahd Airport again. It was finally time. We were headed to the airport. This was it. We were going home. We were back at King Fahd Airport and ready for transport. They had warned us many times about going through the final checkout before boarding. It was rumored that many soldiers who had already left were trying to sneak Iraqi items back to the States. Someone even had tried to bring an AK-47 in his bag. So I was a little nervous about going through the checkpoint. I didn't have anything but trinkets I had purchased, but they scared us so much with the threat of Fort Leavenworth, the military prison, that I was worried. Also, they made sure we knew that we might get our bags dumped. Luckily, I went through the checkpoint without much trouble. The MP verified my orders, then felt around my duffel bag and released me. I watched as the guy in the line next to me got his bag dumped. In the military, you have to work hard to pack your bag, so he just lost half an hour of time for sure. I boarded the plane with all my other IRR members, middle seat again, of course. They weren't going to make it easy for me by giving me a first-class seat or even an aisle. But this time it was a 747, and we were flying home. We weren't allowed up in the lounge area, but I did take a minute on the way to the bathroom to take a look upstairs. It was the first and last time I have ridden on such an amazing plane. Germany, well, for a moment. We landed in Germany for refueling, and they let us get off the plane so we could go into a rest building to relax a little before the final trek to the States. As we entered, a huge round of applause and thanks greeted us. People were slapping our backs and cheering us on. I just accepted it. It was nice to be honored for what we did. After we entered, that group left, and we found out that it was part of General Norman Schwarzkopf's entourage. That was pretty cool. Stormin' Norman was the general that commanded the Allied forces in Operation Desert Storm and Shield. He is credited with creating a war plan that protected all of us. Although he wasn't actually in the group, it was amazing that we got applause from part of his group. I wondered if this short stop counted on my list of countries visited. We are home, or should I say, they are home. The rest of the flight was uneventful, and we arrived at Fort Hood, Texas, sometime during the morning hours. Most of us were so messed up from the jet lag, but it was great to be back on American soil. We boarded buses and headed toward the barracks. When we pulled up to the headquarters for the first cav, there were signs and family members everywhere. It was like you would expect when you returned from war. The regular soldiers were with their families now, kissing and hugging, crying with happiness. It was a touching moment, but damn, it hurt. We weren't out yet, we weren't home, and we were just on one more stop in this crazy journey of the IRR. The sergeant told us that our duffel bags would be transported to the barracks. He pointed out the barracks and said the bags would be there in a few hours. So we literally had nothing to do. The best damn beer ever. As the IR group was walking, depressed and lonely, we walked by the APHIS store. This is the military version of a 7-Eleven. Someone suggested beers, and we all said that was a great idea. I bought a six-pack of Miller Genuine Draft, my favorite beer at the time. We went out back behind the store and popped the beers open and toasted each other. It was about 11 in the morning, and I was drinking the best damn beer I ever had. I hadn't had a beer since coming back into the Army over 3 months earlier, and it felt great. I was going to miss these guys. I was pretty sure that I would never talk to them again, but we had shared a moment in time that could never be forgotten. We were the IRR, the forgotten soldiers. We had returned from 2 months and 3 days overseas, and we were happy to be drinking again. Another nondescript set of barracks. I guess a six-pack wasn't a very good idea after not having any alcohol for 3 months, so I was pretty drunk when I found my way back to the barracks. Because of the flights from Saudi Arabia, I had been up for almost 2 days, and I found my bag, my room, and crashed for the rest of the day. I didn't even get up for dinner that night. The final assignment. They woke us up around 7 a.m. in the morning the next day. Surprisingly, I didn't have much of a hangover. We went to the chow hall and then lined up in formation. There were all my buddies from IRR, along with some other soldiers from other units who had been called back like us. The sergeant in charge didn't know much yet, but he did say that they were trying to get us home as quickly as possible. He had just found out this morning that he would be monitoring our group. We were allowed to fall out for the day and the weekend and be back in formation on Monday morning at 0700. I suddenly had a great idea. My aunt, uncle, and my grandparents lived outside of San Antonio. This was only 2 hours away. The visit of a lifetime. I ran to the phones and called my Aunt Trudy. Yes, of course, they would love to have me over, so I hopped a Greyhound and took it as far as it would take me. My aunt and uncle met me, and we went to their house. I was able to surprise my grandparents and spend the day with them. Then, as if it all was coming full circle, I sat with my Uncle Bob, the one who had talked me into considering going in the military in the first place, and shared stories. Here I was, about to get out of the Army, having spent time in a war zone, and we were able to talk about everything. It was hard, because I wanted to say that I was in the fight and make up these great stories about being a hero, but the war was over just too fast for much of any stories. I told them the story of James and how a lucky draw had kept me alive to be sitting here with them. They thought it would be nice for me to get my picture taken at the Missing Man Monument on Randolph Air Force Base, which was just a few miles away. The statue depicts jets flying in formation with one missing. The inscription reads, "We who came home must never forget those who could not." This was a perfect place to end my journey and start my new life as a civilian. After a couple nights in a real bed, my aunt and uncle drove me back to Fort Hood. They drove me past some of the tanks from 1st Cav, the tanks that I had never had the pleasure to really see in the field. The time had come. On Monday in formation, the sergeant had great news for us. We were not headed back to Fort Knox. We were going to be released from here. That day we would start the process. We were headed into supply, where we would be turning in anything special we were issued for the war, and to make sure we had the basic supplies in case we were called up in the future. Oh yes, they could call us back again as needed until my 8-year contract ended in October of 1996. Then we went to the travel department where they helped us get tickets home. Finally, it was a meeting I had been to before, the meeting where they explain your benefits and ask if you would like to reenlist. Yeah, right. And that was it. A few days later, I wished my fellow IRR members goodbye, and I was on a plane home. I arrived back home on May 1st, having been in for a little over 3 months of active service. Epilogue. I arrived home, and there were some family and friends there to greet me and welcome me back to the civilian world for the second time. It was so nice of them to come. I don't know, I was in a really weird space on the flight back. I was happy to be returning, but in some respects I wasn't. I truly believed, as many of us did, that we wouldn't be returning, except in caskets. I had found out in talking to my parents at Fort Hood that indeed my friend Tatum had died, and I could have been in his place except for a little bit of luck in the names they chose for orders to different units. After having spent more than 2 months in the desert, I wasn't sure what to do with myself, but I needed a change. I know many hoped I would return to my old life, to a room in my parents' house, back to CU, and back to the weekly parties, but things were different now. I still felt lost from the desert. Amy had succeeded in finding a house in Greeley, and I moved into a room in a town I had never visited. Greeley is a small town about 60 miles northeast of Boulder and is in the plains with lots of farming and cattle. Within a few weeks in Greeley, I knew it was not going to work between us. Maybe I had changed too much, or maybe we just had different goals. Mutually, we decided it was best if we went our separate ways. So I moved into my own studio apartment near the University of Northern Colorado, UNC, and I enrolled in math education starting in the fall. I wanted to be a middle school math teacher and moved on from my old habits that had held me back. I realized that through all of my experiences, one thing was true. I was always teaching or learning from others. I had an open mind, and I was able to adapt to changes. This was the right goal for me. The studio apartment was just down the hill from the college, and I lived alone, preparing to focus on school. I made it to my sister's graduation from Cornell with the rest of my family, and we had a great trip. The reality set in when I was back in school. The grades were there, and I was learning a lot, but something was still off in that first year. I tried dating a few women, but it didn't work out, and in the end, most of them ended poorly. I still felt this pressure from around me, like I had to do so much with every moment of my day to carry my life for my friend and others who didn't return alive. Personal diary, 5 months after returning from Kuwait. Sometimes I dream about what my future will hold, but then I guess I realize that it changes day by day. What if what I'm doing now isn't really what I should be doing? Many times I feel so lost, and I'm not sure if I'm just hurting everyone around me. I used to think that when people came to me for help and I gave it, that I was really making a difference, that I was really helping someone that needed it. But maybe I was wrong all along. What the hell is my life coming to? Yes, the grades are there for once, but so much is missing from my life at times. I feel so alone. I have people around me, but I'm isolated from them, like a wall that completely surrounds me and there is no way out. What exactly does this world mean to me? Where am I going and who will be with me? When I was in Kuwait, it began. The walls closing around me and no escape. All I could see was sand and wasteland, no life. No one knew who I was or cared. I was just another body. Then I returned and felt the same way. The problem lies within me. It used to be that I could express my pain in words for people to understand, but now there are no words to express the deep feeling. At times I feel so helpless around them, so alone, even when I'm in the room with myself. Even to curl up in bed alone and try to cover my head, surround myself with protection, the feelings of being alone are still there. I want to free myself, but how? No one can understand if I can't even express it in my own mind. I earned straight A's the first year in college, but have never fully recovered from the struggles in my mind. The desert certainly did a number on me. The reality was that I felt like I was on borrowed time, and it took a while to get over that and realize that I could be happy and that I did have something to give to the world in this second chance that Tatum and others were not given. I met my wife Susie in a math class in my second year at UNC, and we have been married now for 33 amazing years. However, I have never forgotten how I got to this point. You might have expected a lot of fighting in this book or huge battles, but this book was more about the craziness of the military. It was about the challenges that American soldiers go through every day to protect our rights to be free. At times I complained and wondered why I joined, but in the end it was the best decision I ever made. The Army made me who I am today. It made me better organized, better prepared, and ready to face down just about any challenge. It taught me so much about other cultures and the different way people perceive the world around them. I also learned about loneliness and how scary it can feel when you don't know where you are going. I am not going to say I didn't make mistakes or treat people badly along the way. No one is perfect, but I hope that I have made amends with most of the people in my life. I want to thank everyone that was there for me throughout my journey and my family who always supported me, listened to me, and sent so many letters. I also want to thank my friends who stood by me before and after this experience, and to the soldiers and leaders I met along the way who molded me into a new person. Finally, I want to thank the soldiers like James David Tatum who have given their lives for all of us. From now until the day I die, I will live life to the fullest, knowing that I am not only living it for me, but for Tatum and the other soldiers who didn't return from that war. Thank you for reading this book. Fort Ord, A Final Story. After I left Fort Ord, it officially closed in 1994. The soldiers and equipment were moved to Fort Lewis, Washington. Fort Ord was slowly being converted to other uses. A college State University at Monterey Bay moved in, and other companies were looking for opportunities to develop the area. In 2004, my family decided to take a trip to California. I suggested stopping by Fort Ord on the way. When we arrived, the gates at the front were no longer there, and we were able to drive right in. I was surprised at how quickly it all came back to me, and I knew exactly which road to turn on to reach the motor pool. The buildings were still standing. I went inside, and there were workers picking up the final bits of trash in preparation for tearing down the building in the next week. Then we drove over to the old barracks, and I showed my family the cracks that were still in the walls from the earthquake. I had my wife take a picture of me in the sand, where we did PT every day. It was an interesting trip down memory lane. 35 years looking back. It has been 35 years since these adventures took place. I still remember the details vividly. My life improved vastly since then, but reading back on my diary entries from when I first got out, I still have many of those feelings of inadequacy and the pressure of living up to everything. Time has diminished these feelings a little, but they haven't gone away. I am forever changed by the experience in good ways and bad. It is who I am. My body is racked with things that happened to me over there. It finally came to light that burn pits where soldiers burned trash and other items in the desert were toxic to us. And since then, I suffer from digestive issues and trauma from the experience. I am hoping to attend the opening of the Operation Desert Storm Memorial in October of 2026. I want to be there to honor Tatum one more time. I still think of him many times. As a high school teacher, I shared my experiences many times with the students. Every time Veterans Day would roll around, they would want to hear more. I always tell them how many skills I learned from the Army. It was worth the pain for sure. Thank you for reading my story. Mike Travis, February 2026.